We'll come again in the system. We learn how to transition from our app to the camera application, take your photo and then bring that photo back to our application. So let's get this started. I'm going out into Under the Studio and here I'm going to start a new application. I'm going to call this one My Camera. And then the moment loads up in my Under the Studio. What they want to do is I actually want to head into my layout and I want to make myself an image of you as well as a button. That's basically the plan that takes us to camera application. And then we have an image of you to show the photo that we took. So here I'm going to head into the design mode, because for now, I don't need to do something very basically elaborate at one more time because my grade isn't nearly finished yet. So here, I'm going to go ahead and say I have this button. This button is a little bit larger maybe. And then there's my image. You know, maybe they need something by default. I'm just going to give it this little image. It doesn't really matter for this test. And right now, I'm not going to really worry about the constraints. So because of that, I'm just going to go ahead and make this insert constraints. I'm just going to let it create its own constraints usually. Why does it resize sizes, but also the size of them necessary? Like so I'm just going to come back and make the height of the button, maybe 40, and now everything is good. Now here's my image, you and then this one, I'm going to call it a photo button. And now we are going to head into our programming and get started writing the actual code for how are we going to go to the camera application and how are you going to take photos back to here. So here's the very first thing I need to do is actually need to head into my manifest. I need to give it the right permission. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go ahead and say user's permission and the permission that we want to be using is camera. And that's all I have to do in here for now. So we want to be able to access camera from our application. Now, I'm going to head into the main activity and in here I'm going to go ahead and say right at the very beginning and then create we should take care of our permission. However, keep in mind that you have to the permissions, the way that we saw in our previous lesson. Which is properly get the permissions depending on the result, making a request and depending on the results, setting a valuable, pretty invaluable for now, because I want to cut down on the amount of code and I want to simplify. I'm just going to request for the permissions. So I'm just going to say the compound that request permissions. And this wants 3 arguments. The very first one is this and there is an array of permissions. So it's an array of the only permission I care about right now is manifest permission, that camera. And then finally, I'm going to give it a request code and I'm just going to start to give it 100. Keep in mind that this assumption right now is that when you're on this application, you will always offer the permission. You will always granted the permission. That's why I'm not checking whether there was or there wasn't. I'm not checking whether the permission has been granted or denied. And this isn't really a recommended way. But you can just get away with it for now because we want to make our code a little bit less overwhelming. So here, once we have that permission, we actually have to go to our take photo. By then, I'm going to say sit on click listener for this and then click listener for it. We to do basically something very simple, which is we actually have to go ahead and say there is an intent that takes us to action image capture. So I'm going to say real intent, which is not an internal error. It's an intent in terms of media story that's on the media. So I'm going to get action image capture. So that's my intent and what we want to be doing. You actually want to start with it. Now, here's the thing. You can't really just start the activity, for instance, such as this one, simply because you want to know what happens with them, what they mean with them. Is that what happens when you go to this activity and you do whatever you want to be doing in there? What is the result of that and what would you like to do with that result? Because of that, you have to start the activity for results. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and say start activity for result and this selectivity for results. You basically have 2 things: the activity, the intents that you want to go to, and then as well as the request code for it. And I would expect you would do both of these things. So I'm going to say this activity will result intent, and then I'm going to say the request code for it is actually going to be. I'm going to give it a name, so here I'm going to say where camera results, quote, I'm going to put this ad, let's say 1 or 1. Now I'm going to say this is my request. And the reason we do this is because we want to know when we get the activity results, which could be interesting because there might be different activity results. And this is the one that we're interested in when we open the camera. So how am I going to use that? I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say in my after my uncreate, I'm going to say an activity result. So this is an override function, basically very similar to uncreate. So here it has the request. It has the result code and it has the database. So when go ahead in here, I'm going to say if request code in here, if this Lanio is camera result code. So basically if the results I've gotten is for this opening of the camera. So that's great. Now we have to check to see if there actually is a result code. So I'm going to go ahead and say you've resolved code is activity in that result, okay? So if that was the case as well, of course you can put these two if statements are using an AND logical operation in here. I'm just going to leave it like this for now before I write the code to handle the images that we take by the camera. Let me actually run the application so we see what we have so far. So I'm going to come up here from the application and heading to my Android emulator in here. When I go in there, obviously at the very beginning, it asked me whether I want to give access to the cameras. I'm going to say hello. And then when I hit the button, it actually takes me to this place, which is basically the camera application of the device. In this camera application, there is a little bit of an emulator in here that we can actually use the old for them to navigate around the room. You can also use the combination of WAAX, the like, basically any video game, which, as you know, we're on, and then you can take a photo. So here I'm going to say take this photo. And then once this photo is taken, the moment I had this taken by the notice, okay, by then, this is where the activity results gets called and the results are coming to this application, which is basically these results are in data and now they are actually get this data and show it on our image view. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and say, oh, I have a discarded image bitmap and that's going to be the item that is an optional value. We don't know if the intent actually has anything in here. So I'm going to get the non-optional part of it. I'm going to say extras from the extras. I'm going to get the on the outer part of it. So that's going to be tough and I'm going to get it as bitmap. And now we've gotten ourselves a bitmap image from the image that we have taken from our with our camera. And obviously, I could go ahead and say image of you, not that image view dart set image bitmap. And then obviously that becomes image bitmap. Now, before I run this code, I want to show you a little thing just to know as a precautionary matter before you begin your activity for results. Usually you want to check to make sure that your intent can resolve this activity. So maybe go ahead and say if intent the result of activity for this package manager, if this wasn't a knowledge, which basically means if we could come in here and get some warnings or errors in here. For whatever reason, let me see. What is that? So I don't need that. So that's right. If that was the case, then go to the activity and just simply making sure that the intent, this intent, basically can go to a place such as image capture. This is just a precautionary thing to make sure that your package manager allows the same time to open they, for instance, in this case to camera. And that's all we have to do in here. Let me refactor the code a little bit so things are a little bit easier to see whenever I'm coding. I like the text to be a stock like this, but I'm teaching. I prefer to see more code in one screen. So that's the situation that we have because the intent we wait for the activity. For example, once we come back, we get the image bitmap and we show it on our image. Will let me run the application and we can see what we got so far. She is going to put up once again, and once it shows up at the bar, then obviously is not going to ask me for the permission anymore because we already have granted the permission, I'm going to say. But in here, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's take a photo of this corner. And once the photo was taken, I'm going to have the OK button. And when we come back, we see that image. Not if you notice the image here is actually not a very high quality image. She's actually got a very blurry look. And that's simply because data is actually giving us the thumbnail of the image is not bringing the full resolution image, the full resolution image. You should save it on your SD card and then access it. And that's something I'm going to show you in our next little